got to make sure that these banks that are getting the equity stakes circulate that money. Obviously, there's a lot of concern that the banks are just going to use that to recapitalize their balance sheet, and maybe throw off dividends to shareholders. But how is it really going to help the overall market? Talk a little bit more about how we make sure that bailout package actually goes.
By threatening them. The thing is this, I think the Secretary made a mistake. He should have put some conditions on it. I did not want voting shares. I don't think it's healthy. It's interesting. There's a kind of Hegel, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The conservatives were in power. Phil Gramm and Dick Armey, they had their way for long enough. There was no government role in the financial sector. As a consequence, we now have too much of a government role in the financial sector. I don't want us to own banks. And what we need to do is a synthesis next year. But the answer is, you should have put some conditions on them to lend it. But here's the deal. No bank is an island. Banks need things from us going forward. They know we're going to regulate going forward. And I'm being very explicit. If the financial institutions often said, or as any business says, don't over-regulate me. Don't regulate me to the nth degree. Give me some flexibility. I say, fine. But if we give you flexibility, and then anytime we ask you to do something responsible, you say, it doesn't say I have to, then don't expect flexibility. In other words, don't use the fact that it doesn't explicitly say you have to do it in the law as a justification not to do something socially responsible, and then tell us never to put the stuff into the law. So that's basically it. Look, two hedge funds. I was in the New York Times on Friday. I didn't know about it. We passed this bill to try and reduce mortgage foreclosures, inducing banks to do it. By the way, Bank of America told me today that they're going to, because they took over Countrywide, they're going to spend putting $11 billion up to rewrite mortgages, and 630,000 mortgages will be rewritten. People think, and they're using the law that we passed to help. They were being sued by attorneys general, and they're using our law. The law says if you hold the mortgages, check and see if the borrower who is about to be foreclosed upon can pay maybe 80%. Because if you can get 80%, that's a hell of a lot better than a foreclosure for everybody. If you do, we will, this is where the FHA comes in. We've loosened the rules for the FHA about prior eligibility. They still have to show they can make the payments. But if the person can make the payments at the lower level, we will give that a priority to the FHA, so it'll be a guarantee. The advantage of the lending institution is this. They don't want to lose money, but they also hate uncertainty. This means that they will then be able to write it down, but for once. And once they've written it down to that one new level, they'll know where it goes from there. I mean, they won't go any further down. Anyway, we think this is promising. Bank of America is using it. Two hedge funds I read in the paper on Friday, one of them which is owned apparently by Citizens.
It's by Royal Bank of Scotland.
By Royal Bank of Scotland, who owns Citizens Bank. They wrote to the people who run the mortgages for them and said, don't use this law. We don't want to write anything down. Well, I got very angry, and I have summoned them to a hearing on the 12th of November. I said, well, 12th of November, I'm old. When I was a kid, it was called Armistice Day, remember, from World War I. Well, we're having the hearing the day after Armistice Day. The Armistice is going to end on the 11th, and we're going to talk to them on the 12th. I'm going to threaten them. I mean, here's the deal. We're threatening them with much more stringent legislation. And the banks, banks and others need things for us. And that's what that's why I called the Secretary of the Treasury on a week ago Friday and said, hey, but I'm frank, John Thane announces that he's got this money and he's not going to use it. I called Paulson. I said, Hank, John Thane didn't do you or me any favors. I mean, we're trying to explain to people what we're doing. He said, I know. And I called him in and I agreed. I said, fine, but you got to do that publicly. So a week ago, today, he did put out a good statement telling the banks to lend. They need a cooperative effort from us. So I think, I would be surprised if they don't go forward and do this.
Have you been talking nicer to and about Republicans since they said that you guys...
Well, actually, with some I have, and I'm trying to, call a favor. I say, look, we work with you on the rescue for the credit people, but how about doing it for now, the rest of the economy? Actually, that one worked nicely because that was, the Republicans were embarrassed that they got so few votes for their own presidential plan. Look, one of the things that's interesting is the split between the House and Senate Republicans. It shows something about political constituencies. The House Republicans are dominated by the most ideological conservatives. There's been no relaxation there. The Senate is less so. And I guess the answer is, it's hard to be that rigid on a whole statewide basis. But the way the districts are, there are districts where you can be that rigid. And the House Republicans were embarrassed. They got so few votes. So stupidly, one of them, Eric Cantor, blames Pelosi because of her speech. So that's why I said, I'll talk nice to him. What happened was, frankly, the Republicans who voted no got mad at Cantor. They said, hey, how does this make us look? We voted against something that was in the national interest. I mean, we voted for something we would otherwise have supported because she hurt our feelings. So that worked pretty good.
I saw one of your campaign commercials on TV yesterday. And at the end, you said, this is Barney Frank, and I approve this message to speak to you without interruption. What's that all about?
Don't worry, in the right room talking.
Okay.
No, I got a lot of people. Yeah, it's nice not to be interrupted. Look, here's what happened. They had a meeting, and this is not. There's a group that a guy named Grover Norquist runs. They meet, and I know people there. The right wing is right. There was a very good article by John Harwood in the New York Times about a month ago, on a Monday, saying, right wing fears change. Look, they've dominated the place intellectually for a while. Don't worry about economic distribution, that's class warfare. Don't overregulate, that's going to be a serious problem. Let capital have total freedom, etc. They are concerned now because that hasn't worked very well. First of all, under Bush, when things were going well, it still turned out you could have the overall economy growing, but most people losing real income, which is what we in fact have. So they see this coming. So they literally said, okay, they got to find an alternative villain for this, so it doesn't need a lot of regulation. So the villain was the Democrats, liberals, me, Chris Dodd to some extent, and helping lower income people, the Community Reinvestment Act, etc. Now, what made me an easier target for them was during the rescue package, the bank thing, I was pretty prominent. Well, most people don't follow things all that closely, so they kind of implicitly got people to say, hey, what has he been doing all these years? I mean, that's what I said. Hey, I became chairman January of 2007. Oh, I didn't know that. This happened on your watch. Charlie tells the veteran 10 times, all this happened on his watch. And that's, so they then, and I did a lot of stuff with the right wing, so I've been the focus of this. But what happened is, it's a typical pattern. You did it, but when in I became the chairman in 2007, so then they started interrupting. So that was aimed particularly, because the O'Reilly thing got a lot of problems, and some other shows where Fox News in particular, has been very interrupting.